I want to thank our new Patreon supporters, Nadine, Simon, Richard and Tatora, and a very special thank you to Alan, Lena and Christopher who upgraded their Patreon memberships. Every penny you give goes towards making the podcast every week. A few hundred people make this possible and it really is a team effort. Something I wanted to say plainly this week. Some of this week's stories have shown us how issues move through the mainstream media and how wealthy right-wing voices hijack the news agenda. The framing gets set before the facts are known. And the loudest, most confident voices get the headline. The people actually affected get a line near the bottom, if at all. And by the time anyone corrects the record, it's too late. It has a real impact on people's lives. And it means voices, working class voices, trans voices, refugees and migrants' experiences get ignored. And things like this heat wave are reduced to a question of personal comfort and whether we should have air conditioning. Over the Top Under the Radar exists to slow all of that down, take a deeper look at the big stories, the ones being overlooked, and give you the context and the time to make up your own mind. We're Patreon supported, which means we answer to you and nobody else. No advertisers, no platform deciding what we're allowed to say, no billionaire backers. Here's what I really want to say. Your support is the reason this show exists. Every supporter is a small concrete vote for media that nobody owns. If it matters to you, you can be part of keeping us going. Patreon.com/overthetop_under-the-radar. Thank you. I'm Carys Sofoko.
I'm Finn Harper.
We're on a mission to make sense of the news by asking why the media obsesses over some stories, completely ignores others, and will the revolution have aircon?
This is Over the Top Under the Radar.
My co-host this week is a returning co-host.
Hello.
Finn Harper, thank you so much for coming back. You were very popular. Your show was very popular. You have a lot of expertise.
You flatterer.
How have you been?
I'm okay.
Other than hot, presumably.
Enduring, surviving.
Yeah, well, presumably we're going to get into the heat. What does your summer look like? What's the summer look like for a design architect? Is it like Parliament having a break? Do things get busy? What's the vibe?
No, I think construction sites are sort of struggling to keep going in the heat, actually. So there's not a lot going on. I mean, I'm doing lots of writing and I make a lot of films at the moment. I'm going to some fascinating places for Modern House. They're an estate agent, but they have this editorial wing. And I've been going around with them making films of kind of incredible houses from the 20th century. So that's been a lot of fun.
Oh, nice. Okay, great. Well, Finn and I have taken a look at the news agenda and we've each picked one story we think the media has gone over the top on and one story we think has flown completely under the radar and not been talked about enough. And I think I'm going to start us off this week because my over the top is... I'm going to say my over the top is Nigel Farage, but I'll kind of walk you through... So unless
who? Hang on, who?
Yeah, you might have heard of him. He's a politician. So we are recording this Wednesday afternoon, and you're going to be listening to this probably on a Friday morning or maybe even over the weekend. So in the timeline we're on, Nigel Farage has, some people have called it rage quit, has triggered a by-election in his constituency. He is mired in a number of financial scandals, and his response on Tuesday afternoon was to say, the establishment's coming after me. I'm going to re-stand at a by-election from my seat, take on the elites and prove that the people want me. And as things stand, the only candidate in the by-election will be Nigel Farage and Count Binface, which I am really enjoying because I'm a big Count Binface fan.
Really, none of the other parties have stood.
Yeah, so the Conservatives and Labour were pretty quick to say we're not participating in this. The Greens wavered, but their local party has also said they're not going to participate. Restore, the far-right party led by a former Reform UK MP, aren't standing, but Count Binface has said, he's paused his intergalactic mission.
Our only hope to stop Nigel Farage.
And he did have quite a lot of good social media content. He did a Today programme interview this morning, which I don't think any of us had on our 2026 bingo card. And yeah, he's basically said, leave him to me, I'll take him on. And obviously he's got a very appealing policy platform, nationalise Adele.
Yeah.
Build one affordable home. He's got something for everyone. I mean, so Farage is making the headlines, and I don't think... So this has understandably become the big UK news story of the week. But because Farage is a master campaigner and media manipulator, I would say, it has now quickly become about the by-election. But actually, the reason that Farage was on the back foot at the start of the week was a Sunday Times investigation into another of Farage's friends who also gives him money, called Posh George. Had you seen this investigation?
Yeah, this is
on your radar. What do you know about Posh George?
I have been following this. It seems to be an aristocrat, convicted fraudster in the United States, convicted of wiretap fraud, and which makes him a felon in the US.
Yes, he offered to launder money for some drug dealers who turned out to be government officials.
Extraordinary. It doesn't hold an official position with Reform, but is clearly extremely close to the top of the party, but buddies with Nigel, calls him daddy in personal correspondence.
And in a Tatler interview, I don't get the daddy. Why is everyone calling these men daddy? The guy from FIFA called Trump daddy as well. I really don't like it. Really, it's a full body cringe from me. I don't like it. So Posh George Cottrell, a man who is so posh, privileged that his birth certificate, his parents are just listed as of independent means. They don't even have occupations. So yeah, I think the media has not. So the Sunday Times, to be fair to the Sunday Times, they are talking about Posh George. They've done this big expose that's found that this guy who doesn't have a job, but is always around Farage, there are quite a few undeclared financial gifts, loans that the Sunday Times have found that Posh George gave to Farage, everything from flights to accommodation in a fancy property in London. And as probably everyone knows now, but it's worth repeating, if you are a member of Parliament, you need to register financial interests, and that includes the year before you were elected. And so the scandal that Farage is in, that he's triggered this by-election to try and distract people from, is that Christopher Harborne, crypto aviation billionaire, lives in Thailand, another very posh, Eton-educated rich man, gave him £5 million the year before the general election. And it now turns out Posh George has been giving him lots of cash for flights, gifts in kind, which the Sunday Times have exposed, which Nigel Farage just didn't feel that we needed to know about. Because, pals give each other a few million, here and there every so often. And I think the thing that frustrates me about Farage's kind of rabbit out the hat by-election, now we're all talking about whether Count Binface can wear his costume in Parliament. Spoiler alert, he can't if he wins. I actually think there's something quite interesting about the Posh George expose, but also just, there's a sort of Downton Abbey fascination with any wealthy people in the UK, right? And obviously the Sunday Times investigation is very like, he grew up in Mystique. His mother dated Prince Charles, but, she'd done a topless photo shoot to the royals, squashed any chance of marriage. She attended Malvern boarding school and was expelled. And so, I get that there's like a kind of colourful story about this very posh young man who grew up in the UK and Mystique. But I think the thing that really jumped out to me when I was reading about Posh George Cottrell, this man who's hanging around Farage, lighting his cigarettes, buying him lunch, giving him money. He's kind of in his early 30s. He's been floating around for 10 years. His arrest in 2016 in America was just after the Brexit referendum victory. It's just like, here is a party that tells us it is for the people and against the establishment and the elites. And then George Cottrell, just like Christopher Harborne, is a man that could not be more of the establishment and the elite. This is a man so posh, he's able to drop out of school with no A-levels and walk straight into a job in Mayfair. He's able to be prosecuted and imprisoned in the United States and still end up at the top of British politics. And when I think about the kind of community I came from, the kind of areas most of us come from, the kids that left school without A-levels, the kids that went to prison, they don't get a second act. And there's something so infuriating about these incredibly posh men, and let's be honest, they are pretty much exclusively men who went to the finest schools, the biggest amount of money, who can't really fail. There's nothing George Cottrell can do to really suffer consequences. He just moved to a random Eastern European country to trade crypto when things got a little bit hot in the UK. And I just find it's so infuriating that we don't talk more about that. We are constantly being told about these two-tier justice systems, but this is a class of men who don't suffer consequences. And arguably one of the reasons Farage has handled this financial scandal so badly is like these posh men don't like being asked questions. They don't like being held accountable. And Farage, did a really bad media round last week when people were asking him about the Christopher Harborn gift, a different gift from a friend. And he was like, well, I could have spent it on a Porsche. It's none of your business. And it's just like, it is our business.
He was threatening Sky News journalists at an airport and saying, there'll be consequences for you. I'm going to get in touch with your manager. And, making personal threats to journalists is not a good
It's not a good look on camera. He's gone even more Trumpian, hasn't he? Because now it's like the media are the enemy. Some reform politician was calling the Times and the Sunday Times a Labour supporting paper, which I just think, I was like, in what I don't think... I mean, they're Murdoch owned. Yeah. And I don't think the Times or Sunday Times would be characterised by most people as Labour supporting.
No, traditionally conservative.
Yeah, traditionally quite right wing. Rupert Murdoch famously not a lefty.
Well, do you think he's messed up though in this case? Because there's two things that make me think maybe he's messed up. One is that he's clearly resigned in order to trigger this by-election, thinking that will get the story off all his dodgy money dealings. But in fact, by Labour and the Tories and the Greens refusing to stand against him, it's revealed this stunt of pulling the by-election trigger to be a stunt. And that makes him look like he's wasting a whole lot of taxpayers' money, that he's making it all about himself, that he doesn't really care about the people of Clacton or the kind of bigger picture. And so I feel like that is potentially a bit of an own goal that he's created there. And then the second thing that makes me ask this question of has he messed up is, it's interesting that it's the conservative press who are going after him. The Guardian and others are also on the case, but like the Times has led this, as you say, and you'd have thought maybe a conservative-leaning paper would be a bit more sympathetic, even in the face of his dodgy dealings. But it seems like he's really made some enemies.
Someone at the Spectator accused him of rage quitting, which I thought was quite. They were like, yeah, I know.
Wow.
I was like, bloody hell! Don't worry. Tim Shipman has written a column saying he's actually a genius. I think you're right. Well, I think it's interesting. Right, it was a high-stakes move, and I think there's a decent chance it doesn't pay off. If he's schlepping around Clapton, chased by a man dressed up as a bin alien overlord, can't bin face. If a man in fancy dress and him are the only candidates, he has offered to cover the cost of the by-election. I don't think legally we can accept the money, but he was like, I'll cover the cost of the by-election because he's got loads of money, because all these rich people just give him money all the time. Don't worry, don't ask about it. So yeah, worst case scenario for Farage, best case scenario for us. The summer is him and a man dressed up as an alien bin running around Clacton, and he looks ridiculous. Worst case scenario, he gets loads of attention, and attention's what he wants. We've kind of spoken on other weeks about the podcast of they are running out of steam a bit, and he's not. I think there's just an element to him of he isn't a normal politician, and he wants to roll the dice and be like, screw it, now everyone's talking about me and on my terms. But yeah, I think we have to hope it backfires. So yeah, time will tell, but I do feel like we're talking a lot about the vagaries of the donations and not enough about just like how insanely rich and posh everyone is that runs Reform, even though apparently they're for the workers.
My over the top is air conditioning.
Speak to me.
So
I think everyone listening will be very hot right now.
We're in the second heat wave of the year right now. We had Europe's worst ever heat wave a couple of weeks ago. It's climate change is here, and it's real, and it's really quite scary. And in this context of everyone's trying to keep cool, we've had this big public debate about air conditioning. Britain has been historically not really needed to design buildings to account for extreme heat, and we've also not been sort of installing air conditioning units. And that's been fine for a very long time because we've had fairly mild summers, and we've also had fairly mild winters. But that is changing. The heat waves are probably here to stay. And so there's a lot of people rightly thinking, what do we do about this? A, how do we reduce our carbon emissions to stop this just getting worse and worse? But B, given that we're already on this trajectory, how do we adapt our buildings and our cities and our urban environments and potentially our clothes and our working habits to contend with these hotter summers? What has been frustrating me is that the debate about climate adaptation has centered on air conditioning. Air conditioning is an amazing technology, but it is not the only kind of cooling
so
technology.
For people who haven't been following this closely, so a few things have happened. One, if you've decided, as I did when the last heat wave hit, maybe I should look into portable air conditioning in my home, it's all sold out, right? So people are taking matters into their own hands, buying air conditioners, panicking. And then I think, you alluded to it. Meanwhile, people on the left, climate change activists, are generally pretty down on aircon. Is that fair? Like, there's a sort of established, like, it's not great to have? Or...
Well, I think there's a slightly, like a lot of culture wars, it's a bit confected, maybe by excitable editors who want there to be a sort of hard schism between the AC boosters and the AC skeptics. I think sensible people are somewhere in the middle where they're like, a bit of aircon, good, but also we want to marry that with a whole lot of other cooling technologies like better insulation, better shading, more external shutters, more ventilation. Because if you install just AC, take no other steps to kind of keep your building cool or your home cool, very quickly what will happen is your AC will break, because it will be running all the time and it will be competing with like a really, really hot day, and you'll be spending loads of money on electricity to keep it going, and then the machine itself will overheat and break because they're not designed to run all the time. It's a little bit trying to fill your bathtub with the plug out. If you're cooling the air in your home, but you're not really doing anything to stop it just heating up again, you are wasting money and you're probably going to burn out your machine.
And you wrote a really good piece for The Guardian about this that we will link to. And you gave an example of the power of non-aircon solutions. And you talked about your neighbour hanging a sheet.
Yeah, well, my estate is 1960s estate. And so it's better than a lot of contemporary new builds because it has cross ventilation and the homes are all oriented to take account of where the sun is. So it's much easier to keep it cool than if you're stuck in a single aspect
new build
tower with just like a big wall of glass just facing south.
That is, you are describing my home. Yep.
There you go. Okay. We have an unfair advantage on my estate, but a neighbour experimented by just hanging a kind of mesh sheet outside of his window, on the outside, not on the inside. So not an internal curtain, an external curtain. And he recorded a 17.8 degree temperature difference between the shaded window and the unshaded window, which is the equivalent of having 400 watt radiators on full blast.
That's insane. So literally just from hanging a sort of sheet outside of your window, you can cool your home significantly, and significantly presumably cheaper than an aircon unit, like more sustainable. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Okay. So now if he puts in AC, he'll not need to run it as much. That will save him loads of money, and it will protect the machine itself just from having very simple external awning like that. So I'm here, I guess, to say, like, I think AC is great. We should have it on more buses. We should have it on more tube trains. But we should not be thinking this is the one and only solution that we need to roll out everywhere. We need to see it as part of a intelligent mix of cooling technologies, some of which might be very, very simple, like external shutters like you get in the south of France or the south of Spain. Simple, cheap, keeps the sun out.
The other thing that really struck me from your piece as well is that this is, filing this as climate change adaptation, which feels scary, but is the reality, is that, as you say, there are lots of countries that are very hot and they make buildings differently. My dad is from and lives in Ghana. We have like louvers, so windows that are like slats of glass. I don't fully understand how they work, but I get that they seem to be better than just like a pane of glass. But I think the thing that really struck me from your Guardian article was also this sense of, without a state, like government or sort of collective solution, then people are going to do what's best for them individually, and that's not going to work out well. So everyone panic buying aircon units from, John Lewis or Curry's or wherever that you can get just a portable aircon unit with a hose sticking out of your window. Like, that actually isn't the best solution for us collectively. And as you say, we're recording in London, the tube lines that are air conditioned, oh my goodness, makes such a big difference. Like, you're not chugging water all the time. And presumably what we need is people like at a planning level to make these sorts of decisions rather than individuals like hanging sheets and buying aircon. Like obviously people are going to do what they need to do, but what is that? I mean, what should the government be doing?
Yeah, we need a strategic response to rising temperatures, I think. And it's like any essential sector, the public should take, the government should take a strategic interest in that sector. So in France, the public sector owns significant stakes in transport, in aviation, in telecommunications, in the energy sector, because those are critical industries, and they don't want to just leave them to a totally privatized system which leaves customers or citizens exposed to price gouging and to a poor quality of service for very high cost. In Britain, we need to be thinking strategically about not just aircon, but all cooling technologies. The government should be leading by example here. They should probably be owning some of the cooling sector, whether that's awning creation or shutter manufacturing or air conditioning units. It's quite a shocking policy failure that the majority of London buses don't have aircon yet, but the majority of private taxis do. Part of it is because we're outsourcing so much. We've fallen so far down the outsourcing cultural kind of trajectory that we don't have those state-owned enterprises that can help us to adapt to rising temperatures strategically and efficiently.
My under the radar for the week is a report by Amnesty International that actually came out at the end of May, but due to various vagaries of our recording schedule, and I want to talk about it now. So it's a report by Amnesty International that came out at the end of May, and at the end of June, the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, brilliant organisation, we'll link to the story, talked about the report and the fact that no media had picked it up. And so the report from Amnesty was an analysis of media coverage about trans issues and trans people, and about the organisations that are gender critical and their kind of increase in funding and prominence. So it's a really good report that analysed the Times and Sunday Times, the Telegraph, the Sun and the Guardian's coverage over a number of years. They looked at 16,913 articles on trans-related topics. That's just in those outlets from 2020 to 2025. The report is called Like a Snowball, and it's about just the surge in articles about trans-related topics. The Times and Sunday Times publish 83 articles a month on average. The Sun, which publishes the fewest stories, publishes 38 articles a month. So that's like more than one a day. And this piece of research into media coverage didn't get much media coverage. It got a critical thing in Unheard. I think Pod Save the UK mentioned it. Pink News, which is a queer news outlet, reported on it. But it's pretty shocking stuff. And so even though the report's a few weeks old, I did want to talk about it just because it's really sobering reading how few trans voices are ever reflected in any of the coverage. The most quoted people were J.K. Rowling, Keir Starmer, Nicola Sturgeon, or as far as I'm aware, cis people. The most references to trans people over that 5-year period were Isla Bryson, a trans woman convicted of sexual offences, who's kind of often used as like a bogeyman, and then Brianna Guy, who was the teenager that was tragically murdered. So trans people are like noticeably absent from any coverage about them. And then this snowball of coverage from newspapers across the political spectrum, just as gender critical groups that are quite well funded are snowballing, just, Amnesty argue, and I think it's legitimate, is out of proportion to the percentage of the population that are trans and out of proportion to any public interest argument, I think, for most of the stories. So I wanted to talk about it because it hasn't been talked about enough, and because none of the media outlets responded to Amnesty's request for comments, or, even The Guardian reported on the research. And I think that is quite telling. Had it flown under your radar?
It had, yeah. I mean, the media obsession with trans people has not flown under my radar. That's
hard to miss.
Incredibly palpable. I can
hard
see
to miss.
Why Amnesty. I mean, it's commendable, I guess, that Amnesty has commissioned this report in the first place. So have I understood this correctly, that the essence of the story is that Amnesty called out a bunch of newspapers for their obsession
with trans people.
Who make up like 0.5% of the population, right? It's sort of very...
Potentially lower depending on... But yeah, 0.5% of the UK population, yes.
Okay, so the relatively small population, newspapers obsessed with them. Amnesty call that out and they produce a report, but then no one actually... picks up on the
even
report.
though they're obsessed with writing about trans issues, even though, you know, if you're at the Times or Sunday Times, you need to be producing like 3 articles a day, but it did not register. If you're at the Sun, you need to be doing, you know, 1 a day.
Is that because they know that they're obsessed and they're deeply embarrassed by it and they don't want to
so it's interesting because Amnesty don't do too much on attribution. Like if you spend any time on like the Times or Telegraph websites, which I unfortunately do because of this podcast, sometimes it reads like there's just a brief to the news desk of like, if you can find a negative story about a trans person, pitch it and write it. I think there's a sense that it is kind of open season on trans people. Amnesty haven't said it, but I would say pretty confidently it's like a cultural issue. It's something the right have weaponized. So Amnesty don't go as far to say that, but they do also show, you know, there are these funded groups, not just from US evangelicals, lots of UK gender critical money going into these groups that claim to represent women and women's rights. You're receiving millions of pounds of funding. And one of the things you can do if you're an advocacy group or a non-profit that has lots of money is you can generate reports and do polling and create media moments. And again, Amnesty don't say that's what's happening, but that is potentially one of the ways that you can then kind of create coverage. But I think it is this idea of like a snowball, this sense that it has its own momentum. And then suddenly, you know, even The Guardian, whose coverage is analysed to be a bit different, but still not significantly better than other papers, it just becomes something that you write about and something that's important, even though it's not a top 20 issue for anyone going into a general election, even though, as you say, trans people represent a tiny percentage of the population, potentially less than 300,000. So what actually happens is a group of people who are just factually very marginalised are demonised and made to feel very unsafe. I mean, there's a couple of other things I want to mention. So one of the media regulators, commissioned their own research that found there was a 400% increase in trans coverage over 5 years. That was across national and regional articles. And they also interviewed editors and journalists and found that, you know, they backed that up qualitatively. And then we've already seen in the British Social Attitude Survey that attitudes towards trans people and prejudice against trans people is on the rise. We know that hate crime is on the rise. So I think, you know, the other thing to say is this media coverage impacts on people's lives. And if everyone with a megaphone and a platform goes around being like, well, aren't you worried about trans people? Aren't you worried about trans women? What about trans people in sports? Like, if people are saying that all the time, every day, we're social animals. And we're like, oh, maybe I do need to be worried about bathrooms, even though I wasn't before. Everyone's talking about bathrooms all the time. Maybe there's something to do with bathrooms, and maybe, you know, I'm not safe. And I think that this report speaks to a bigger problem and a bigger reality we have in our news, which is that increasingly trans people who come over from small groups, different marginalised minorities who don't have funding and like big NGOs that can lobby and advocate for them, you know, try to find more research, but Stonewall and Gendered Intelligence and the handful of charities that represent trans people do not have lots of money to do loads of PR and like hundreds of research reports. I mean, is it so, as you say, you've noticed the trans coverage. Do you notice as well that sense of like minorities being picked on in the media?
Yeah, so I think it raises an interesting question about the nature of journalism, because there are times when a minority group or an issue might be in the news that affects a relatively small number of people, and it is right sometimes that journalists take that seriously and give it proper discourse and proper airtime, even if it's not something that is affecting absolutely everybody in the country. So I've got no problem with that in theory. But in this particular case, what is sort of boiling my blood is it doesn't seem to be an even-handed, proportionate, appropriate amount of time to spend on trans issues. It seems like an obsessive, compulsive fixation that has sort of lodged itself in the minds of these editors, and it seems unshakable. And they're pulling and pulling at this thread, even though you're quite right. A lot of the general public are a bit sick of this culture war and would really prefer for our coverage to be less kind of obsessive. My under the radar is the 75th anniversary of the Festival of Britain.
Okay, tell us more. What, for those who listening who do not know, what was the Festival of Britain? It happened 75 years ago. What else do we need to know?
This year, I think in May specifically, or May or June, that was the official anniversary. And there has been some coverage of it. The Festival of Britain was this enormous government-funded event, party, festival, exhibition that happened shortly after the end of World War II. And so the Clement Attlee government, first Labour government, commander majority is in power, and they call it a tonic to the nation, that they're going to put on this huge festival and it's going to celebrate British achievements in sciences and agriculture and education, and it's completely epic. They take over 27 acres of central London. They build the largest aluminium structure in the world, the Dome of Discovery. They build over 20 pavilions. They build the Royal Festival Hall, which is still there. They build all of this stuff to put on the spectacular show of kind of Britishness, and like an exciting future for Britain is sort of showcased in the Festival of Britain. They have 5,000 prize farm animals from all over the country are brought to the Southbank and put on show for the general public to go and see.
Do we know which animals were
all the
paraded?
animals?
All the cows, horses, all the animals. Amazing. Okay.
And, millions of people go and see it. And, it's quite famous. And, Royal Festival Hall's obviously still there. And there's been various pieces in the media about this anniversary and its sort of legacy. But the reason I wanted to bring it as an under the radar is the Festival of Britain was actually much bigger than that Southbank site with Royal Festival Hall. It actually spanned the entire country and included all sorts of interesting things that are sort of, to some extent, forgotten or brushed under the carpet. So, for example, there was an entire aircraft carrier was converted into a floating exhibition, and it travelled around multiple port cities. There were public benches commissioned and rolled out across regional counties. Village signs were erected. 2,000 campfires were lit all across the country on sort of opening night. There were bus shelters built. There were woodlands planted. It was a really epic nationwide program. And in London, there wasn't just this sort of cultural site on the Southbank. There was an entire housing estate was built in the East End, where it still is, and it had houses and schools and churches and pubs and kind of pedestrian shopping plaza and a clock tower. And a lot of that, I think, is sort of missing from our national memory. I think a lot of people have no idea that the Festival of Britain was that big, or that included a working operational housing estate that people could move into. And I find that very interesting. Like, what can we learn from that? And actually it's still quite a successful housing estate in some ways, and has a particularly elegant, humane style of architecture that I think has a lot to teach us. But B, like, what's going on that we have this kind of collective amnesia that we've sort of forgotten that even when we were completely bankrupt from having just fought this horrible, horrible European war, we were able to somehow put on this public sector-led epic exhibition that didn't just like have a sort of party, but actually improve people's lives and change neighborhoods.
I love this. It flew completely under my radar, maybe because we have slightly different algorithms and I don't know as much about architecture and design in the built environment, but I had sort of heard of the Festival of Britain vaguely, obviously researched it when you said you wanted to talk about it. And it's so impressive how something that happened so long ago was genuinely across the UK, not just in London, not just for people, who could get to the Southbank. And you're right, the ambition and the vision and the positivity, which obviously we saw in many ways from that Labour government, the Clement Attlee government. This is the era when we get the NHS, lots of social housing built, but that sense of, looking to the future and saying the future is exciting and the future will be better, which feels, I don't know about you, Phin, but it feels pretty lacking in our politics across the spectrum and just generally in the vibes of the UK. It just feels a bit like everything's a bit crap and no one's really happy about it. And, whether it's Farage or the Tories or even, I think Andy Burnham ran a hopeful campaign in Makerfield. Yeah, but this sense of generally it just feels like, well, there's no money and everything's kind of broken and everyone's grumpy and it's all going to be a bit crap. And actually, It's probably what we need right now, is someone being like, it could be so much better and the future will be better and we can do these big, impressive things and the government can do these things. And it does feel just almost tonally like something we've lost, as well as the memory of what happened.
Yeah, I wrote a piece for The Nerve, who this sort of new magazine that have sprung up from people who left The Observer.
Oh, yes, Carol Cadwalder and others, yes.
Entirely
we'll
female editorial team.
Yes.
And a point I wanted to make in that piece, and I guess I want to make now, is like, maybe it's in the interests of our political leaders to downplay these accomplishments from the past, because if even Attlee, with very limited resources after World War II, could put on this not just show but kind of life-changing celebration, why can't we in much more favorable economic circumstances? And I take the point that like the bond market is tough and it's much harder to borrow money than it used to be, and like, you know, we should have been doing all our major public investments 10 years ago and now we've sort of missed that window, and you know, all those things are true. But also, it wasn't like easy for the 1950s governments either.
I mean, there was still rationing. We're talking about an era when there was still rationing.
Yeah, all of this happened long before the end of rationing.
A whole section of the population that comes back deeply traumatized from having been fighting in various countries around the world.
And it's not just about vibes; it's about actually doing stuff. You know, if the Festival of Britain was like the Great Exhibition, just like a big show, I'd feel less nostalgic about it. But the fact that they built a housing estate that is still there, and that there are still children going to the primary schools that they built in the 50s.
George Lansbury Estate, right?
The George Lansbury Estate, yeah. Named after the former leader of the Labour Party and grandfather to Angela Lansbury.
Oh, Murder, She Wrote. Love that. It's a deep cut.
What a hero. But it's in Poplar, and, you know, it's worth going to have a look around. There's an incredible clock tower by the architect Frederick Gibbard, who designed Liverpool Catholic Cathedral. That's got this sort of double spiral staircase in the middle of it. Like, it's good quality stuff. You know, it's not fancy, but it is well designed and it's well built, and a lot of it is still knocking around. And that's what I want. I want leaders who are not. I'm sure Adney Burnham's going to bring some better vibes. Great.
Oh yeah, I think the vibes will be better, but
I need more than vibes.
You want buildings. You want buildings with shutters.
Yeah,
because things are getting hot.
External
I'm with you.
awnings.
We want to build stuff, and also, yeah, at a time when it was harder, people built things that still lasted today. I think that's a lovely, optimistic under the radar to end on. And again, as ever, when you come on, something that I would have not known about Phin. So thank you so much for sharing.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening. If you want to hear more of my conversation with Phin, you need to sign up and support us on Patreon, patreon.com/over-the-top under the radar. Phin, where can people find you and your work?
I am on Instagram.
You're big on the gram.
At Phin Harper, PhinHarper.
Great. We will link in the show notes. Thank you so much, everyone. We'll see you next week.